Welcome on into the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah insider for KSL Sports. On this episode, had a great conversation with Andrew Crowley, aka Runnin Hoops Pod. He's got a new Twitter handle because the guy got locked out of Twitter, but he's got a new Twitter handle, Runnin Hoops Pod. Make sure to go follow him. We had a great conversation for about 40 minutes, just talking all things Utah basketball, the players that they've brought in, kind of our early initial projection of Utah starting five next season, and just give a lot of thoughts on individuals and sort of the makeup of this team, this roster, and all that. So had a lot of fun talking to Andrew. But first, need to start this podcast with the big news this week, which came out Wednesday, and that was Cam Rising's official retirement from the game of football. And for many Utah fans, this wasn't necessarily a surprise, but I think seeing that announcement, the reality of it, obviously sunk in. And I think this decision has been rumored for the last couple months, but to see it, again, even though it was anticipated, I think still shook a lot of Utah fans to the core, just seeing that it was genuinely over for Rising. I know that there was a subset of Utah fans that still had the belief that Cam was going to get another medical redshirt year and be around the program, but this is it. And unfortunately for Cam, the injury that he suffered against Baylor has lingered, and it's unfortunate that it has ultimately cost him his career. And he's not the only player that's dealt with injuries that have forced an early retirement. So I think it's important to as a good reminder to show appreciation for these players in the moment, to appreciate what they do, to appreciate the effort and what they give to the program that we love, and all of that. And I think it's also good to probably share the same sort of feeling for another great in that program that we haven't heard a lot from the last couple of months, and that's Brant Keithy. I think it's easy to kind of forget about Brant and what he did, but he's suffered multiple significant injuries as well. So I hope that a lot of Utah fans take a moment to share their appreciation for the both of them, because they helped lead Utah to a lot of great accomplishments during their time with the program. And with Cam specifically, I think a lot of Utah fans would agree that he's secured his place among the greats in program history. Top 3, top 4, top 5 in terms of quarterbacks. I think that's pretty common for a lot of Utah fans. But I think Cam did a lot, did so much even in those two seasons, the 2021 season, 2022 season, that he belongs in the conversation for greatest figures, whether it be player or coach in program history. I believe he belongs in the conversation with the Urban Meyers, the Ronnie Macks, the Alex Smiths, the Kyle Whittinghams, the greatest figures in program history. I think what he did in those two seasons, not only the great moments on the field, watching him execute, this offense with the playmakers around him, leading Utah to great victories and all of that sort of stuff, but the moments off the field and the attention that he brought the program, he had a profound impact on the University of Utah. And I think he belongs in that conversation with the all-time great figures. And so, I've spent the last day or so thinking about the greatest moments in Cam's history, in Cam's tenure, right? And I've ranked mine, and I'd be curious to hear from Ute fans what their greatest memory or greatest moments with Cam Rising are. But I've ranked them here, and so I think it's important to start with where it all began, and this was Cam's takeover moment was the San Diego State game in 2021, right? With everything that was going on, Charlie Brewer obviously with him starting and being that guy. For me, this moment, number 5 all-time greatest moment with Cam, coming in and just seeing the light switch flip on for the Utah offense, right? It was so drastic, the difference with Cam on the field. It was amazing to see it. I was there at the game, and to see the impact that he had, not only on the field but off the field, the energy, the juice, the interactions with teammates on the sideline, just everything lifted, grew, with Cam at the helm. So for me, this is my number 5 all-time Cam moment. I think he was just fantastic and exactly what Utah needed. Number 4 for me, the 2022 Rose Bowl against Ohio State. And, this will probably be a moment for a lot of Utah fans where it's going to rank higher. I think personally, I rank a few moments a little bit higher than this. But, this was one of the all-time great Rose Bowl games. And unfortunately, it was a loss. But Rising, his impact was undeniable. And he left the game early. He had to exit this game due to a concussion that he suffered in this game. But Rising threw for 214 yards, 2 touchdowns, which included, a dart to Britton Covey, an absolute dime to Mekhi Bernard in the corner of the end zone, and then the 62-yard scamper on a 4th-and-1 QB power, where he just breaks through a cluster of Ohio State Buckeye defenders and then sprints down the sideline for the touchdown. For me, that game was incredible, and I firmly believe that if Cam finishes that game, Utah wins that game. It was an all-time great moment for Utah football, and I think one of the best moments for Cam Rising in his time with the program. Number 3 for me, the 2022 Pac-12 title game against USC. This was the second matchup against the Trojans, and it was a lot of fun, to say the least. I think a lot of Utah fans would agree that there was some concern, right? You beat USC on your home turf a few weeks earlier. Cam Rising wasn't healthy. He was clearly dealing with an injury that impacted his level of play, which you saw against Stanford and Arizona. But none of that really mattered. USC got out to a great start in that game, but Cam never flinched, and he ended up finishing the game with 310 yards through the air. He threw for 3 touchdowns, spreading the wealth to 6 different receivers. And obviously, we remember that Dalton Kincaid was dinged up for that game, so he had to incorporate other receivers. Money Parks had perhaps the highlight of the game if it wasn't for Thomas Yasmin, doing his thing and dragging defenders into the end zone. I think that for me was the number 3 moment in Cam's career with him at the helm. Number 2 for me, maybe this will surprise some people, but the 2021 USC game, Cam leads Utah to the first victory at the Coliseum. I think this was kind of the moment where you knew that you had something special in Cam Rising. And I think it's important also to remember that the context off of the field that Utah was experiencing. If you go back a couple weeks prior to this game, Utah beats Washington State for their homecoming game. And unfortunately, that is also the same weekend that Aaron Lowe, had his life taken from him. And for Utah to rally in such a short span and to play in his remembrance and also Ty Jordan's memory, I think speaks to Cam's leadership and the leadership across the board. But Cam providing the memory, the flea flicker of the play call that wasn't, but he just made the best of it. And I think his touchdown run, breaking through tackles and getting into the end zone, I think that for me was kind of the moment that we all knew that Utah had something special in Cam Rising, not only the football player but the leader. And I think that is where just it all sort of came together. But I think we all would agree that the biggest moment in Cam Rising's tenure as the Utah quarterback was the 2022 home game against USC. And, you remember the context coming into this game. It was Lincoln Riley, it was Caleb Williams together at USC for the first time, for the first season. They were rolling, I think ranked number 7 in that game. They were undefeated. Utah had lost twice. They lost to Florida in Gainesville, and then they also lost to UCLA the week before in Los Angeles. But um, you get into that game, and USC started just incredibly hot. They came out and jumped on Utah early and jumped on them big. But Cam and that offense, um, just like they always did, they never flinched, and you could see Cam's hit the command of the offense that he had. You could see it throughout that game. And obviously, he was working with Dalton Kincaid, who dominated the USC Trojans, 200 plus yards, a couple touchdowns, I think, was just dominant. And, with Cam Rising throwing for, what did he throw for? 400 yards, 400 and 415 yards, 2 touchdowns, added 3 rushing touchdowns as well with the game-winning 2-point conversion. That moment, that play, I think is going to be etched in the memory banks for Utah fans, crystal clear for decades to come. I think everybody's going to remember exactly, the play, the exact play, how it played out, how it was executed, the sounds from the stadium, the videos that have been saved, that were recording the play and all that. I think everybody has, their own video of that play. And luckily for me, I was in the right place at the right time, and was in the middle of the celebration of that play, and it was a great moment, just an incredible moment. It is without a doubt the loudest I've ever heard Rice-Eccles Stadium. Just an incredible atmosphere, an incredible moment, and I think culminated in just what Cam meant to this program. And he never wavered, never flinched, none of that stuff. He was truly great. And so I hope that we continue to show respect to Cam, show our appreciation to Cam Rising, but also that we show appreciation to Brant Keithy and other guys. But I think it's pretty cool to look back at what Cam accomplished. And I think with how things have gone the last two years with the injury stuff and all that, there's certainly a lot of emotion regarding Cam and how things played out over the last 2 seasons. I hope that Utah fans take time to just show their appreciation for what Cam did, because he did a lot and helped Utah to take that next step as a program, as a power conference contender. So finish up with that. I think Cam is one of the great quarterbacks without a doubt. I think he's also one of the greatest figures to come through the program as well. And I would just be curious to hear from Utah fans what your top favorite moments, Cam Rising moments, are. So curious to hear from you guys. But let's get to it. My conversation with Andrew Crowley and around Utah basketball. What's up, Andrew? How you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you? You're looking rested. You're looking tan. How was Hawaii?
It was really good to get away for a week. And, typically, what I've learned over the last 3-4 years is when I go on vacation, good things tend to happen for, Utah on the recruiting trail. And that certainly seemed to be the case for football and basketball. It was fun, I think, for everybody.
How were you? How much were you able to truly unplug while you were out there?
Yeah, great question. I my screen report on my iPhone was an all-time low, 4 hours per day. So I was not on the phone. I didn't pull my laptops out once. Like it was a true unplug. It was great, man. And I think everybody deserves at least a couple days like that where you can just put the phone down and just unplug. It's great. It's needed.
Yeah, I was in a forced unplug from Twitter. So, it was kind of like being in Hawaii, but just alone in my house without access to social media.
How'd you do that? How'd you? I mean, at least you didn't have to pay for a hotel and plane ride and all that stuff.
That's true. That's true. It was the official explanation was suspicious activity on my part.
Ah,
I think this is my conspiracy theory is that all of those times that I called Yegor Demin a bum on my podcast this
the
year,
Russians.
I think the Russians got to me and
The
maybe some of the tech
Russians.
bros.
Yeah, hey, it makes sense.
Yeah,
That makes a lot of logical sense. Easy to connect the dots there,
that's
to say the
right.
least.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I better watch what I say about AJ Debansa and some of these other guys.
Oh man, my goodness. All right, dude. Well, where do you want to start? We've got a lot to catch up on. It's been, like I said, while I was out, there was pretty productive time for Utah on the recruiting trail. I think they landed what, 3 guys while I was gone, while you were gone too, while we were gone
That's
on
right. Couple
our,
of hilltoppers.
yeah, a couple Hilltoppers, a Hawkeye, uh, and yeah, I think this roster has come together pretty well. Just now that we've got the collection of guys, what do you make of what Utah's been able to do over the last month or so?
Yeah, I think, for me, I think the obvious thing, and I think probably for just anybody with a set of eyes, is that this roster got more athletic, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of, to me, there's a lot of high upside, but also high floor guys, right? Like, I don't think that you're going to see some of the inconsistencies that maybe we've seen over the last couple of years with the roster, just because I think the talent, has jumped up a notch
Yeah.
with some of the guys, and all these guys that they've added, Seydou Trehor, Babacar Faye, like they all play above the rim, and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff I think is really exciting, not only from like a fan perspective and enjoyment of watching perspective, but just something that they'll be able to take advantage of in some of these games where in the past they've had to rely on one or two guys getting hot from beyond the arc to stay in the game. And they got some bucket getters. Don
Yeah.
McHenry, guy goes around screens, he can get in the lane, get a floater off, right? Like get you that bucket that you need when you need it. So I'm really excited, honestly, about just all of the additions that we've seen, and especially these last 3 or 4.
Yeah.
It's been a real nice kind of cherry on top of retaining Keanu Dawes and then bringing in some other guys. What is your 30,000 foot, kind of state of the Utes as we sit here in early May?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways the way that they've constructed this roster is sort of from a 30,000 foot view, where it's they brought in guys that I think it's more than just year one impact, right? I think, Alex has talked about this a lot, but he wants to build a program and have guys that want to stick around. And I think, we learned about what this roster is going to be and what the vision sort of is with the roster with each edition, right? We gained a little bit more clarity, and I thought that there was a pretty clear focus on landing some, pretty high ceiling kids early on where they have a lot of potential, a lot of room to grow. And, they only brought in, I think, a handful, I think 3 seniors, in this group with James Okonkwo and Don McHenry and Babacar Faye. And so I think Utah was pretty mindful of getting guys that have talent that need some coaching and development and that can get better, not just, from this year to next year, but even beyond that. I think Alex, wanted to set a foundation for his program in terms of, the brand of ball they want to play, the culture that they want to have, and, the identity that they want to be known for. And I think they landed guys that all kind of speak to the same sort of identity, athleticism, guys that can finish around the rim in transition and in the half court. And then he added a couple, good veterans that have been played a lot of ball that can lead these young guys. And I think that's sort of my 30,000-foot view, is that, Utah went about their roster construction with that same sort of bigger than just this year type of view, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one of the things I was doing the math on with, if you assume your starting backcourt, and who knows, but if you assume your starting backcourt is Terrence Brown Jr. and Don McHenry, that's like 110 starts at the Division I level. I mean, it's Western Kentucky, it's Fairleigh Dickinson, but still, you're bringing in some guys that have a ton of experience to kind of run your operation there in the backcourt. And then you're bringing in, a talented guy like Choppa Moore off the bench that's going to, just get more and more experience as he gets to Utah, because the playing time is going to be there, with a blank slate, essentially, which is what this roster was when the offseason started. Like, all these guys are going to have a massive opportunity coming in here, this upcoming season.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that kind of leads us to a fun conversation in terms of, now that we've got, this is pretty much they've still got what, 3-4 spots left. I've lost count because I've been away, but
I think it's 4.
4 spots left.
Yeah.
So, they can still make some additions, but for the most part, like, this is going to be the group that we see next season. So, if we're looking at this group, like, what is your May 8th starting 5 for the Runnin Utes?
Yeah, so this is tough because I did this on my last episode before Faye committed. Right. And because they're sort of still lacking in that center position, I had Okonkwo as my center, Dawes at the 4, Ja'Kai Howard at the 3, and then I have Terrence Brown at the 2 and Don McHenry at the point. Now, Alex gave an interview earlier today, this week, whenever this gets released, where he kind of mentioned Terrence Brown as the point guard. So we'll just say they're interchangeable, but I think that's probably going to be, that would be my starting 5 right now, with, the experience and, all of that stuff, with a guy like Faye coming off the bench, Seydou Traore coming off the bench, Choppa coming off the bench. I don't know if I'm leaving anybody out there, but yeah, that's where I would go. What about you?
Yeah, so you can vouch for me here because I asked you. We were texting back and forth. So I had my starting 5 was Terrence Brown, Don McHenry, Ja'Kai Howard, Keanu Dawes, and James Okonkwo. So the same, and I think that speaks to sort of the the versatility of the guards that you brought in, that they can play either spot. But in watching Terrence Brown, he just had the ball in his hands so much more than Don McHenry did. And so that sort of led me to think that he was the point guard. And then you look at some of the numbers, and, Terrence Brown, I think, had, an assist rate around 20%. Don McHenry was more closer to 10%. I want to say, I think it was like 11, 12, somewhere in there.
It's like a 3-to-1 ratio, I think.
Yeah.
Like Brown had 3 assists, McHenry had 1, I think, or 1.7, something like that.
Yeah, right. So I think, Terrence Brown is going to be, probably going to be the starting point guard. And just, Alex talking about it today, just sort of uh, more or less confirmed it, at least right now. So that's the starting five. And I think, when you look at this group, this starting five, again, you like the athleticism. This is a really long group too. With James Okonkwo, he's got a 7'2" wingspan, so he's listed at 6'8", but that 7'2" wingspan does so much for him to help him play, bigger than his height. Plus, he's got some bounce. Like, he can get off the floor, which is exciting. Keanu Dawes, we just know he's got good length. He's gonna rebound. Board man gets paid. Like, he's just that dude where he has that mindset, right? He's like Kawhi Leonard in that sense, where he just goes and plays ball, and he finds his way to the ball. It's almost effortless with him. And then Ja'Kai Howard, great athlete. I'm excited for it. He's the guy that I'm really excited about. I think can make a leap similar to Keanu Dawes this past season. Then having that experience in the backcourt with Terrence Brown and Don McHenry, I think is really, really big.
Yeah, and one of the things I've been thinking about too is, even though they don't have sort of that traditional center on the roster right now, is that the way that things are kind of played in the Big 12, you don't necessarily need a back to the basket center the same way that you would if you were in the Big 10, right? And you were going
Right.
up against Purdue and Michigan and their 7-footers and some of these other guys. So I'm going to be very interested to see if they try to add like a true back to the basket big man, or if they go with this kind of more athletic group in their front court and have it kind of be, 3 forwards and 2 guards, or 3 guards and 2 forwards, versus that kind of traditional lineup that that we've grown accustomed to at Utah, because we've had 7-footers for so many years.
Right. The tall ball lineup with Lawson Lovering and Brandon Carlson and that group, it's certainly a change in sort of the roster construction, right? We're used to seeing a 7-footer on the roster we've had one on the roster for so long. But I do think this sort of roster construction, this sort of athleticism is more tailored to the Big 12. I was going through rosters, from this past season, and there's not a lot of like big bodies, right? Obviously, Kansas had Hunter Dickinson, but he came from the Big 10, right? He didn't start his career in the Big 12. I think just every roster is more this sort of long, lean, athletic type, and I think the roster, the way it's constructed right now, even though everybody is concerned about adding a center and a 7-footer, like, I think this roster, though it's not totally comfortable, right? You're not comfortable with it, but I think there's enough size on this roster. It's just the depth, right? And if injuries mount, then there's some concern. But I think this roster, there's only a couple of teams. Arizona is another team that plays pretty big, but for the most part, it's a lot of long, lean athletes in the Big 12.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing this past year was when Utah went into Houston and got mollywopped by Kelvin Sampson and crew. And Kelvin Sampson in his post game was like, well, people were just not sure how we were going to handle their length and all of this stuff. He's rolling out, Jawan Roberts at 6'8" in the center position, and, Javier Francis at 6'7". And
Yep.
like anybody thought Utah was going into Houston and beating that team just because we had, a couple of tall guys. Right. So I think you're
Yep.
right there. I mean, Norchad Omier was a double machine at Baylor at 6'7".
Yeah.
Foose down at BYU, 6'6", 350 pounds, just moving people around the paint. So I think it could work. I think it could work.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And I think, there's obviously, with 4 spots, there's still room for Utah to potentially add, another center, another point guard. If let's just go down that road, with the roster as it is, what is missing from this roster? What would help round out, this roster and its depth, its potential for next year?
So I would say, absent that center position that we sort of already talked about, um, I would like a couple of knockdown shooters. Like I think that a Gabe Madsen, ironically, would be really good with this roster where he could kind of just go stand in the corner and shoot threes the whole game and not necessarily be relied on to be that number one scorer, right? Like if they had gotten, a guy like Brendan Housen from Kansas State out of the portal, right? So I feel like they need a knockdown shooter, like at least one, like a guy that's would come in with a, true like over 40%,
Yeah,
3-point percentage. I know some of these guys that they're bringing in have pretty good shooting percentages, but their volume is pretty low.
right.
Um, Seydou Trehor, right? Like when he was at Manhattan, he was I think it was like a 29% 3-point shooter on a much bigger volume. When he was at
Hmm.
Iowa, same numbers on a much smaller volume. So I would say knockdown shooter. And then I'd love to have like a true assist machine, like a guy that's coming in. I think the comparison I made on my show was Elijah Hawkins at Texas Tech. He came in from Minnesota last year, averaging like 7, 8 assists per game, right?
Hmm.
And so a guy that kind of comes in and that's kind of his only job, right, is just
Yeah.
distribute. That's where I see kind of the biggest needs on this team. What about you?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Um, I think another guard would really round out the depth. As much as exciting as it is to have, Terrence Brown and Don McHenry and Elijah Moore, be the three that will, play the bulk of the minutes at guard. I think, just having another one on the roster will do a lot. And potentially, depending on if they add a guy that can really make a big impact, I think, you are looking for that sort of distributor type where he can set up a Terrence Brown, allow him to play a little bit more with that scorer's mentality that he has. I think that would be great. Obviously, Don McHenry, I think, with him, he's interesting. He's, when you look at what he did, this past season, 17 points per game, you love that. But then you look at some of the efficiency numbers, the shooting, and he had a bigger volume than the previous year, and his shooting percentage dipped to 31% behind the 3-point line. But if you go back to 2023, 2024, that season when he averaged 14 points, I think he shot about 37% from 3-point range, and he limited his attempts from deep to about 4 per game. So I think, that's going to be the goal for him, is limiting his attempts. So if you can find somebody that can, help shoot and be another shooter from deep to have that gravity as well, but then also play make and allow him just to be that scorer, I think that would do him really well. And then I think another big man, I think Ibi Traore is probably a guy that will be pretty interesting to learn about and follow over the next couple of months, just to kind of get a feel for where he's at in his recovery and perhaps progress that he's made. I think he's well suited for the center position, especially in what I think is going to be the offense where you have a big man that can be and fill that dunker spot. He can be that sort of athlete at the 5. But like we learned this past season, is that you need some big bodies, some guys that can you know compete inside against some of these bigger teams, because if you don't have them, it's going to make it tough. It's going to make it tough. So I think those are kind of the big things. I'm with you there in terms of adding another guard that can distribute, play make. Hopefully, he can be a bit of a knockdown shooter, but then another big body I think would be really really good for this roster.
Are you surprised at all? So this is one of the things that I've been thinking about quite a bit, right? Because of the intentional nature of how Alex put his staff together. Are you surprised that among the commitments that Utah has received and the guys that they've signed, there's not an international player yet, and there's not a local player yet?
A little bit. Yeah, a little surprised. especially given the addition of Martin Schiller. It seemed like that was a shoe-in for at least one international addition, especially the Johan Grulo, who ended up committing to Virginia. Perhaps he just didn't want to give up the orange and blue look that he was rocking there.
That lousy
Um,
Ryan Odom.
yeah, dude, pesky, pesky Ryan Odom. Um, but I think I do think the latest that I've heard is that Utah is looking in the foreign market for another addition and could perhaps be close to one. So surprised that we haven't seen one yet. The in-state stuff is really interesting, and I think there's probably a number of different factors that contribute to that. Obviously, with it being late in the game in terms of the high school scene, you understand from that perspective of why that's the case. But then in the transfer portal, there were a couple guys that seemed to have made sense. Maybe obviously anybody with Utah Valley ties, or BYU ties. I don't think there's much of a chance there, and for for obvious reasons. But still surprising that we haven't seen an in-state guy, especially with the emphasis on this being sort of a homecoming for Alex Jensen. You'd think that there would be quite a bit more excitement, but what I will say is I know there's a great emphasis on recruiting the in-state talent, whether it be homegrown here in the state or whether it be transplanted in at somewhere like Wasatch Academy. I know that they're going to take some swings at some guys in the state, and that's going to be a big focus moving forward.
Yeah, I think I saw an interview with Dean Ruckert from Timpview.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and he was talking. So he was kind of going through his list, and with Utah, it was like they've got a new coach up there. I need to get to know him, and I was like, yes, you do. Yeah,
Yes.
you absolutely do, Dean. Like let's get on that, Alex. Now that the playoffs are over, let's go have some FaceTime with the locals.
Yep. And so another story I'll share here is there's a prominent media figure here in the state that has he's spent time up at Utah State. He covered Utah for a while. He's now blossomed into a great reporter, and he's got connections to one of the staff members, one of the new assistants. And he DM'd me and said, "Hey, watch out for Junior County there at Wasatch Academy." My guy on staff now told me that he's going to be a pretty big focus. So we're going to keep tabs on that Wasatch Academy program more so than what we have in the past, which is exciting because there is a lot of talent that comes in through that program. And I think too, even beyond the Wasatch Academy, like there's a lot of talent in this state, and with the connections that Alex has to that Utah prospects, program, obviously, yeah, there's probably going to have to be some making up there, on Utah's end. Not so much Alex,
Right,
not so much
right.
him,
Yeah.
obviously, but maybe other figures up there. But I think that would go a long ways towards boosting that relationship for Utah.
Yeah. I think we need, maybe an apology tour or
Yeah, probably. Yeah,
maybe some gift baskets or something like that.
that would help. Gift baskets are always great.
Yeah. Well, and I guess you have to consider too that and this just popped into my head, but if you're talking about 2026 kids, Jackson Johnson is going to be a huge focus for them to hold on to, and David Katoa as well, and they'll both be back, basically this time next year. So, those are obviously two guys that going into the following season, Utah will have in their front court and back court. So
let me ask you, Andrew, like when you look at these guys, who do you think are going to be, the big producers? When you start over like this, it's kind of like, your best guess. But I think there's some signs, some indications, some good indicators for certain guys. But I'd be curious to hear from you. Who do you think are going to be, the guys that you can kind of lean on for production, on a pretty consistent basis next season?
Yeah, I think I have this right. that Alex, when he was fairly early on in his coaching career, worked with Paul Millsap pretty closely. Do I have that right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I would kind of put KD in that Paul Millsap role, right? Like he's going to be a guy where you're going to look up and you're going to be like, holy cow, he's got 14 rebounds and
Mm-hmm.
20 points with 10 minutes to go, like,
Yeah.
so I think, and I'm not even
On
saying,
like 8 attempts. Like
right.
he's incredibly efficient. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing is I don't think it's going to be like necessarily that they run the offense through him,
Yeah.
but he's just going to get his, right? Like you made the point earlier, like, the guy that rebounds, he's going
Board
to,
man gets paid, baby.
yeah, board man gets paid. And so I think KD's going to be a big producer. I think that there's a reason why he's, one of two lone holdovers on the squad, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, you and I know this from our conversations earlier in the off season, but it was kind of one of those things where it was like, oh, things aren't trending well with KD. And then all of a sudden they were. And I think that that's because Alex was like, hey, Wes, let's get this done.
Yeah.
Let's get this guy back in the fold. So I think he will be. I think the dynamic between Don McHenry and Terrence Brown in the backcourt is just going to be fascinating. No matter which one is got the ball in his hand and which one's coming off of screens. Like, because I think both of those guys are just buckets, right? They're guys that can just go get you something, and so I can see nights where both of them are in double figures in terms of points, and then as we've said, Ja'Kai Howard's the X factor on this team, right? Like if he comes in, if he accepts coaching, if he's got the right attitude, like sky's the limit for that guy.
Right. So, I think for me, obviously KD, it just he's going to be just a consistent producer, a top producer for Utah. We saw it, at the end of the season, he's a double-double, a walking double-double almost, for Utah. And I think he's going to, he's going to be a guy that continues. It's just, again, the game just comes so easy to him, right? It's not that he has to work hard for, his points. He doesn't have to work hard for rebounds. He just finds his way to the basketball, and he just has that sort of knack, like a Paul Millsap, like you mentioned. He was just productive, and I think what's exciting is that Alex can develop that skill and teach him the game at a different level that I think will help KD get to that those next levels in his game. I think for me, the guy that I look to next beyond KD is actually Terrence Brown. I was doing a bit of a deep dive, in just numbers and stuff, and obviously Terrence Brown playing at Fairleigh Dickinson, 35 minutes a night, 20 points per game. Like that's really exciting. But when you actually look at, some of the competition that he faced, they played 6 power conference opponents. And I'll just run through them really quick. So against Miami, the Hurricanes, he went 8 of 14 from the field for 18 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists. Pretty solid outing. Against Creighton, he went 7 and 19, so not as great shooting, but still, he's getting shots. 19 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists. Against Nebraska, and Nebraska, they had Raleigh Wooster on that squad. They had a couple other guards, so that group's pretty competitive. 9 of 18, 23 points, 8 boards, 1 assist. And then there's a couple other. Villanova, he went 10 of 18 for 27 points. So he's a guy that he's competed against power conference opponents, and he's produced. And I think having that, knowing that, I think is really exciting. I think he can be a guy that, like you said, when you need a bucket, he can get to the bucket. And that's really an element that has been missing for Utah for quite some time. They had it a little bit with Davon Smith. Sucks that last year he wasn't on the roster, but I think Utah's got one in Terrence Brown that can do that. Don McHenry, he's a bit of a 3-level scorer where he can knock down shots from deep. He can get into the mid range, And then Elijah Moore, is going to be pretty interesting. So coming out of high school, he was dubbed one of the top shooters in the class, and shot 31% from deep this past season, which isn't a great number, but I think he can make a jump where he can get to 35, 36% with some of the talent around him and some of the guys that can create open looks and that. Ja'Kai Howard, I think he's the guy. I think I mentioned it earlier, but he's the guy that I think can make a leap similar to KD, where you look at his numbers. He played 10 minutes a game, so he was just on the court probably to be sort of that energizer, right? Just go out there, bust your butt, and make an impact. And he made a significant impact. You look at his per 100 possession numbers, it's like 18 points, like 14 rebounds, 3 steals, a couple blocks, like he did it all. And I think that's really exciting. And obviously the athleticism, we're all drawn to the dunks and the highlights, but I think there's a mentality there that you can tap into where he can be this truly productive player in so many different ways. And I think that is something that I think Alex should lean into with him and try to draw that out of him next season, because if you get that from him, that's a pretty dynamic player to have on the wing for you next year.
Yeah, and it also feels like it's a group of guys that, kind of number one, like a lot of them have something to prove, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's the old sort of, one man's trash is another man's treasure, right? You could look at the roster and say, oh, well, this guy flamed out at Auburn, this guy flamed out at Syracuse, but that just gives them all the more motivation, coming to Salt Lake. I think the other thing is that they don't seem like guys on the surface, and obviously we've played no games yet, all
Right.
of that stuff, but on the surface, they don't seem like guys that are going to shrink in big moments that, are going to let an 11-point lead against a Mississippi State evaporate. You know what I mean? Like they'll be able to they'll have the athleticism to handle some of the pressure that they're going to get. Now you're going to have off nights, right? Like everybody in this league is capable of losing by 30. Mm-hmm. And so you could still have that, but I just don't think that it's a group that is going to be afraid of the moment, right? Or let the moment get too big for them. And, they're going to have some challenges next year,
Sure.
kind of based on what, where they played and who they played in conference this past season. They're probably going to have to go to Kansas, right? They're probably going to have to go, to an Arizona again and, all of that stuff. And so that's going to be fascinating to watch. But I think, on paper, Alex has put together, and Coach Chills and all these guys have put together a team that are at least capable of being up for the moment.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think that speaks to some of the recruiting profile. Or I shouldn't say recruiting profile, but you look at where these guys came from, where they competed, in high school especially, right? These guys were, Ja'Kai and Elijah Moore and even Terrence Brown. These guys competed on that AAU circuit, and did so pretty competitively. And these are guys that want that sort of environment, that want that sort of, those stakes, if you will. They want to play in these big games. And I think that has been an element that's missing. I think Ezra Sarr, brought some of that where he wanted those sort of big games and embraced them. And I think that is something that, it's going to be hit or miss. It's going to come and go, right? It's easy to say that here May 8th until you actually get in those arenas and you get in those environments, and then you get punched in the metaphorical face, right, and all that, and then you see how these guys respond. But I do think this is a group where, again, I think I mentioned this earlier, but this is a group where there's a lot of room to grow, especially next year, right, where you've got these guys that have had a year under their belt, Elijah Moore, Ja'Kai Howard, that can take a big leap going into year 2. And, I love what you said where these guys they all have something to prove and a chip on their shoulder and reason to to be optimistic about them even taking, a step in their games. And I think, that was the case with James Okonkwo. When you look at him, he's a guy that's been around the block. He started out, was it West Virginia or North Carolina? I can't remember which route he
West
took,
Virginia, yeah,
and then North
and then
Carolina,
North
and then
Carolina, yeah.
Akron. And so he's played in a lot of games, and he's, didn't produce a whole lot. But when he committed, I remember there was, one of the national recruiting guys was like, he's still got a lot of potential to tap into.
Hmm.
And considering the fact that he's a senior, that says something. I think there is something to it where you do have a 6'8" guy with that sort of length and that sort of bounce that is still learning the game and can now be placed in a role that will best suit him. I think that's exciting. So a lot of these guys do have things that do have room to grow. I think beyond Ja'Kai Howard, the guy that I'm most fascinated by is actually Seydou Traore, where the numbers don't pop, right? Like he averaged 5-6 points a game, handful of rebounds. But when you look at his game and how he handles himself on the floor, how he plays, I think he's got the chance to be a bit of a secondary playmaker for Utah, where he can kind of be that point forward, if you will. I was looking at per 100 possession numbers and all of that for each of these guys, and he actually had the second highest assist number behind Terrence Brown at like 3.7. I think Brown was at like 5.3, and then Don was at like 3.4. So there's some playmaking there that you can tap into, and I think that's exciting, where you kind of, it'll be fun to see this group come together and how they perform. I think there's some interesting dynamics that could potentially surface with this group, where Traore can be that sort of point forward. Babacar Faye can be an athletic 5 man and really you allow Utah to go to this. Play some 5-out basketball and play a little bit more up and down style of play. I think it's just exciting. I think it's clear that Alex wants to lean into athleticism, length, and skill, and we'll see how it all comes together.
Yeah, I'm getting way ahead of myself here because these things won't come out until like the middle of the summer. But I'm going to be really interested to see like where they land in the initial like Ken Palm numbers, Bart Torvik
Mm-hmm.
numbers, your guy Evan Miyakawa, right? Like
Yeah,
because those are all based on projections and what they expect these guys to do. Utah, I think, really during the Craig Smith era has started somewhere in the 70 to 80, 90 range every year, and they've ended sort of in the 50 to 70 range. And
mm-hmm.
so I'm just going to be interested to see like how these metrics guys, the guys that really dig into the numbers, that understand stuff
Yeah,
that make you and I just kind of go, huh? Like, but where they project this team to be, against
yeah.
their schedule, but just production wise.
Yeah, that will be interesting. And Bart Tovik, I love using his stuff because he's got some great tools that you can utilize. He keeps tabs on everybody that enters the transfer. He's got numbers and analytics, and he ranks all the transfers based on his metrics and stuff. And he, his if you go to Bartovic, you can actually look at where he ranks Utah's roster currently based on some of his projections. And currently, it's the 52nd best roster in the country, which sounds pretty bad and that, but it's 10th in the Big 12, which is just, it speaks to the talent in this league, the depth. It's crazy the amount of depth here. There are 9 teams that are in like the top 45 of these metrics, and Utah's 52nd. Like I said, they're 10th, which is pretty solid considering the fact that you still have 4 open spots. If you add a couple more pieces to that roster, perhaps you can get into the mid 40s. And Utah was never up up there the last couple seasons. So, and I think too, with this group, we've been talking about it, but it's a group that there is a lot of room to grow, and that's exciting to say it in that sense. But also, it says that this group needs coaching, it needs development, and that's going to be on Alex Jensen and his staff to get that out of them, and that's going to be a big priority. And I think that has been sort of the focus. Alex hasn't been shy about talking of, in terms of talking about, him wanting to establish a culture and an identity. And we kind of have an idea of what that identity is. He's alluded to Houston and the success that they've had and wanting to be a defensive team. And each of these additions speak to and kind of mimic what Houston has looked like with those guards and with the athleticism that they've had. And that's pretty exciting. But he's going to have to develop these guys and coach them up, which is going to be necessary for them to reach their potential next year.
Yeah, once they're all on campus in June, those 8 hours a week that they get will be so valuable. I mean, it's going to be one of those things. And I think that this is where probably that NBA background is really going to help for, with him and Coach Chill and Martin Schiller. Like, they can't waste any time. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like they're going to have to make the most of the time that they have. And I just wish they would let us watch practice, because I think it's going to be fascinating. I mean, they may let you.
Yeah.
You're a big shot.
Yeah.
Me, I mean, no. I don't even live there, so
no. Yeah.
They're not going to get a camera in there for me. But
no.
But maybe I'll fly out and be a guest.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
Hey.
Yeah,
like, hey, this is Miles. Don't worry about it. He's
right. Yeah,
he's coming with me.
He's grown, crazy growth spurt. It's nuts. But no, I hope that we're able to get some practice time. We've had that over the last couple of years where we've been able to go up and watch some practices. I'm going to assume that that's going to be the case, that Utah wants to lean into this Alex Jensen era and getting off on the right path, with the media and everything. Like, I assume that's going to be part of this process, but who knows? We'll see. Him coming from the NBA, I don't know how much practice availability they give the media, at the professional level, but we'll see. But I am, excited to see this group come together and to get a first look at them. I think there's obviously a lot to learn about this group, and that first look will be pretty exciting for sure.
Yeah. It's if they don't let you in, we just got to make friends with some of the boosters. That'll be the next move.
Yep. All right, Andrew. Any final thoughts before we put a bow on this one?
So I'll drop a little nugget for you here. Ooh. On the schedule. So we know that they play Mississippi State in the Delta Center, December 13th, and they're in the Acresier Classic in Palm Desert, California. I believe that they're going to be, I have it on good authority, I'll put it this way, that they're going to be paired with Power 5 teams, Power 4 teams, Power 5 teams in their little 4-team pod. So think Iowa, Ole Miss,
okay,
those types of teams. And so they're certainly going to have a couple of opportunities in the non-con. Haven't been able to make much headway on any other schedule stuff, but I'll keep digging and seeing what I can come up with on that. But there's my parting shot.
Yeah, always good for some scheduling tidbits.
Yeah.
Well, here, I'll share this. Like, I reached out to a source to try and get some context on some of these recruiting wins. It seems like Coach Chill has just been cooking, right? He's just been in the kitchen cooking, and a source got back to me, and he made it clear that this has been a total team effort, that this hasn't just been Chills, that this hasn't just been Eric Daniels, that this has been a total collective effort. And in listening to Alex Jensen, who was on ESPN 700 today, earlier today, and talking about the staff, he talked about Wes Wilcox, expressing some interest in joining him at Utah and how that sort of grew over time. He shared the story of Chills, meeting up with him for dinner and sort of expressing interest in coming to Utah. Obviously, we know Eric Daniels has had his eyes on Utah for quite some time, given the connections to the program and all that. This is a group that wants to be together, and they are doing this collectively, and I think that's super exciting. I think that's a big change from what it's been. I think having a collective effort and hearing Jensen talk about the need for a GM to handle the money and all that sort of financial conversation, to take that off of his plate, I think is just incredible foresight. But again, I think this is a group that wants to be together, that wants to work together, and they are working together. And I think that's really exciting. So a lot more to learn about this group, but this is a pretty exciting first couple of weeks with this staff in place, and we'll learn a lot more about the Runnin Utes over the next few weeks and months. So Andrew, appreciate your time as always. Let people know where they can find you, because as you said, you had to create a new account. So let them know.
Yeah, so it's now at Runnin Hoops Pod. So it's the same handle with pod on the end. I had 1,600 followers. I lost all of them.
Oh,
so
man.
We're starting from scratch, but at Runnin Hoops Pod. I do have one getaway question for you, though, Steve.
Oh, yes.
Now that Mammoth is official, are you on board with Mammoth, or did you want something else?
I was an Outlaw guy, but I converted to the Mammoth last summer. So I'm on board with the name. I like the name Mammoth. The logo, I was hoping for something a little different, but it is what it is. We can't all get everything. We can't, but I'm on board with Mammoth. I like it. What about you?
There were some cool AI designs out there.
Yes.
For Mammoth.
Some
But
great
I mean,
ones.
like, if they don't work with the U to, one, get a game at Rice Eccles, right? That's a miss. But also to eventually have a live Mammoth at the games. Yeah. I mean, what are we even doing?
What are we doing?
Why
are you wasting our time? You want to embrace this history? Well, let's bring the history to life.
There you go.
Let's do it. All right, man. Andrew, appreciate you, dude.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.